Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Torah studies this week, Parshas VAYISHLACH, and we have a conversation about bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. You know, I get a lot to teach bar mitzvah boys, and the question that we always ask, first question is, what is a bar mitzvah? What is a bar mitzvah? And the answer I get, bar mitzvah, you become a man. What does that mean? So, is this really something that we mean, what we say? Bar mitzvah, you become mature, become a man. I mean, I didn't see, I wouldn't let my 13-year-old to drive a car or to do other things that needs maturity. So what is it about the bar mitzvah, about the age of 13 for the boy, the age of 12 for the girl, that we assume responsibility? So we're going to learn, we're going to become a little wiser at the end of this class. And we'll learn that this is something that not only applies to the 13 years old, that is something that we ourselves can also learn from this, how Judaism views what is a bar mitzvah, what is a bat mitzvah. So let's begin. So, in this week's Torah portion, we have, the Torah tells us about the story with Yaakov. Yaakov and his family, they came back after building his family in Haran, by Yaakov's uncle, Lavan / father-in-law. And they come with a family to the land of Israel. He had 11 sons and one daughter. And then we learn about the tragedy that happens, that Shechem took Yaakov's daughter, Dinah, and he violated her and he tortured her. And he was, not only that, if that was not enough, he fell in love with her and he wanted to marry her. And the Torah tells us about Shimon and Levi. When they told them what happened, they heard what happened. So they told the people of Shechem that if you will become circumcised like we do, then we will all be together. You'll be able to marry each other. We'll be able to do business together. And this was something that was really, the people of Shechem, they liked what they heard, and they decided to do this. And then, on the third day after, when the people of Shechem circumcised, Shimon and Levi went up and they killed the entire city, all the males of the city. As we read in this week's Torah portion, Vayehi bayom hashlishi, and it came to pass on the third day, when the inhabitants of Shechem is what it's called in Nablus today, when the inhabitants of Shechem were all in pain, that Shimon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, each man took up his sword. They came upon the city with confidence and slew every man. Now, why did they do this? This is a question that our sages talk about. Yaakov himself, when he heard that, he was not happy. And he asked them, how dare you do this thing? And they answered, they said, will our sister be made into a harlot? So, and of course, obviously, we're talking about the two brothers, and they were enraged. What happened to the sister? But how does it justify to do what they did? So that's not really the focus of today's class, but I will just mention a few of the commentators, what they explain. The Maimonides explains that the people of Shechem were all they all were liable for this punishment, because one of the laws that the Torah God said to the Noahites, they were Noahites. One of the laws was that you need to have a justice system. If someone is doing something wrong, it needs to be taken to the court. They need each of the people in the city is obligated to make sure that there is a justice system, and that anything that happens should be adjudicated, and people should be punished for that. And being that no one did punish Shechem. Shechem was the name of the city of Shechem. He was the prince of the king that he named the city after his son. And no one punished him for what he did, so they all deserved to die. It was a failure to comply with the laws of making a justice system. That's what the Maimonides says. The Nachmanides, then Ramban explains that these people were really violating many other laws that are punishable by death, like idolatry and so on. So they were violating capital sins, and therefore, when the Shimon and Levi came along, and this was an opportunity, so they punished them also for the other sins as well. The Ohr HaChaim says, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, he says that Shimon and Levi really wanted to take revenge from Shechem himself, but then the others came to attack them, and that's what it was in self-defense, basically. So whether we understand or not the justification, one thing is for sure: their resolute, their determination is impressive. Two, these brothers of Dinah taking such action, not being afraid. So the question is, how old do you think Shimon and Levi were at this point? And I'm sure some of you know the answer. Shimon and Levi was the younger one, and he was at the time 13 years old. This is in the next text in the Talmud. It says, in fact, the Talmud says that how do we know that bar mitzvah that are 13 years old, you're considered a man, you become responsible? We'll learn from this very story. Because in this story, the Torah calls them Ish. Ish is a man. So, and this is the youngest age that we find in the Torah that it should refer to a person as a man, was the age of 13 in this story. That's from the Gemara, the Rashi. Rashi in the Talmud says, in all the Torah, we find no instance in which someone younger than 13 is called a man. However, we do find that the Torah describes a 13-year-old as a man, as the passage states, and Shimon and Levi, two of Yaakov's sons, each man took up his sword. So we see that the Torah refers to them as men. So we have it by tradition that Shimon and Levi were 13 years old at that point. And one who wants to calculate it may calculate it and will conclude that they were indeed 13. Okay. So by 13 years old, that's when Shimon and Levi were considered a man. And the question is, number one, what is it about the age of 13? What is it about the age of 13 that makes a person mature, a man? We don't find it that we have such maturity all of a sudden by the age of 13. And question number two, why would the Torah use such a case of violence, even though the violence, let's say, is justified for whatever reason? But yet, why do we choose such a case of bloody case and a violent case to use to teach us when is bar mitzvah? Want to know when is a bar mitzvah? When do you become a man? 13 years old. How do we know? Case of Shimon and Levi, they went and they killed every man. Why use such a violent case to teach us this lesson? And the question number three, why is it that only Jewish people, why is it only us, only Jewish people consider this age as adulthood? You know, we will find many things that the world adapted from Judaism, 10 Commandments, other things, many things. Shabbos, a day of rest, we have once a week. That we have a week is 7 days. It all comes from Judaism. But this concept that 13 years old, you become mature, that is something that was not adopted. And the question is why? Why is it only the Jewish people? So, first of all, to understand what happens at the age of 13. So at the age of 13, we don't really find that is a big transition from young to adulthood. But what we do find is at the age of 13, the child begins to have empathy. You begin to understand something which is outside of you. Children usually wouldn't care about anything that doesn't affect them. So the concept of empathy begins at that age. The process of maturity is a long journey. It takes several years for it to complete and be visible on the surface. But the journey begins at this age. The Rebbe says the Rebbe, the commandments become obligatory at the age of 13, because that is when we reach maturity in terms of understanding and empathy. So being that this is already an age that you begin understanding, begin to be able to have empathy to others. So it is also a time when you're able to comprehend and to understand that there is also another responsibility. When the Torah speaks of maturity, in this context, it is talking about our ability to empathize. The Torah isn't looking for intellectual prowess, but for emotional intelligence, the ability to relate to things outside of oneself. And this is something the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, says. He says to empathize is to really know. One can have a concrete understanding of something and still be unable to experience it emotionally. For example, wise children, says the Rebbe Rashab, wise children can understand something well, but they can't experience it emotionally, despite being intellectually sharp and smart. This is because children lack the ability to really know. What does it mean to know? Da'at. Da'at means knowledge. Know means to connect. Like we have the Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And the know is that to connect, to feel it. Namely, to develop emotional intimacy and feel the subject on a personal, emotional level. The same applies to worldly affairs, such as wealth and power. Children might be bright and smart, they might understand wealth and power, but they aren't emotionally attached to it. They don't have the same relationship with money that adults do. The same is true of the other side of the coin. Children might understand the problems associated with loneliness and poverty, but they aren't distressed by such problems. They don't feel them as adults do. So again, this is the connecting with something outside of them is something that doesn't happen by children as much. Yes, you could say there's exceptions here and there, depending on the culture, the building, and that. But in general, this is the age when children begin to develop these feelings. And the same thing is also true regarding the Torah and the mitzvahs, because at the age when the children begin to comprehend the concept that there is there's a higher authority, there is something outside of you. So accepting morals, that's when the Torah says this is the age that is enough, that is time to accept the mitzvahs. As the Rebbe says, children lack the ability to perceive and feel how precious and valuable a mitzvah is, and how much we lose when we fail to observe the divine commandments. So to be obligated to do a mitzvah, we need to be able to feel its gravity and importance. We need to learn how to feel and be moved by something outside of us. For that, we need to develop empathy. And that's exactly what happens with Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi, when they heard what happened with Dinah, so they had the empathy. What led them to act what they did, to do what they did, is the empathy that they felt towards the sister, towards the gravity of the sin, what took place. So, and this is when most children today, that's when they begin to understand this. And there is, in the next few texts, we're going to see also that even in today's modern science, they also find that in this age, there is the kind of developments. Of course, the Torah is true not because science agrees to it, because even if science wouldn't agree to it, it would still be considered truth. But it's nice to see when you have things that even the science agrees to the fact that at this age you have these developments the developments in the child's understanding, the cognitive developments. So in the next few texts, we're going to see this as well. So this is the notion that a shift in a child's development occurs around the age of 12 fits with popular models of development psychology. One notable example is the work of Jean Piaget. Not sure I pronounce it right, but this is he's a Swedish psychologist who mapped out 4 stages of a child's cognitive development. He called the final stage, beginning around age 11, the formal operational stage. While children in earlier years mostly use inductive reasoning, meaning drawing general conclusions from personal experiences and specific facts, at this age, they become capable of deductive reasoning, drawing specific conclusions from abstract concepts using logic. While children tend to think very concretely and specifically in earlier stages, at around age 12, they become capable of abstract thoughts and begin to consider possible outcomes and consequences of actions. So again, it's interesting. This is the beginning of the development at age 11, age 12, which is interesting. You have also the boys and girls, age 11 and age 12, that also has some halachic beginnings regarding responsibilities to the vows that they make. Is a year before bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. And another thing also here, parallel to Piaget's work in the field of cognitive development is Lawrence Kohlberg's work on moral developments. Kohlberg found that until adolescence, children are motivated primarily by self-interests. They behave well because they are rewarded and avoid misbehaving to avoid punishment. As children enter adolescence, they become more concerned about maintaining relationships and take other people's perspective and intentions into account when making decisions. They also begin to conform to social standards of behavior and understand right from wrong. So here again, in this age, you start understanding right from wrong. And in the next text is also from a doctor, a neurologist, actually, that explains that the differences is not only psychological, but also physiological. So I'm not claiming to be an expert, to be a doctor or neurologist, but we'll read the text nevertheless and see how they write it. So it's throughout childhood and into adolescence, the cortical areas of the brain continues to thicken as neural connections proliferate. In the frontal cortex, gray matter volumes peak at approximately 11 years of age in girls and 12 years of age in boys. That is also interesting. As we mentioned, the bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah, 11 years, that's when the beginning of the development of the girl, and 12 years at the beginning of development of the boy. So it says, reflecting dendritic overproduction, subsequently, rarely used connections are selectively pruned, making the brain more efficient by allowing it to change structurally in response to the demands of the environment. Neural connections that survive the pruning process become more adept and transmitting information through myelation. Myelin is a sheath of fatty cell material wrapped around neural axons. okay, you can surely see that I'm not an expert in this, acts as isolation or neural connections. This allows nerve impulses to travel throughout the brain and more quickly and efficiently, and facilitates increased integration of brain activity. Anyway, so this is very interesting, that it shows us that even physiologically you have this concept of the development of the child when it comes to this age. Now, okay. So this gives us an understanding. So this gives us an understanding of why we have the concept of development in this age, and the age of 13, and the age of 12. The question is, again, why then? It still remains a question, why do we need to learn the whole thing from such a violent case, a bloody and violent event? And to understand this, we need to understand that we need to read a little deeper into this event. When Shimon and Levi, when they did what they did, despite the fact that it was a violent case, a violent event, but what do you see from this? Those are children of Yaakov who knew that their father will not agree, and they themselves were not that type of people. Nevertheless, it shows how they were so given over. They were so devoted. They were so what they did with such conviction that they felt that this was something that had to be done. And to understand this, what we will see a little further, we'll look a little further into the reason why the age of 13 begins the age of Bar Mitzvah. The first explanation, we said that this is the time when they develop empathy and so on. But the truth is that there are two opinions in the Torah of where do we know that 13 years old is the age. And based on this understanding, we'll have a deeper understanding in the whole concept. So here is from Rabbeinu Asher. It says, with respect to your query, how do we know that we only become liable for our transgressions at the age of 13, but not before? He says, know that this is a ruling that God gave to Moses on the Mount Sinai and was passed down orally through the generations. For God taught Moses a minimum measure for every requirement in the Torah. So this opinion that we just read seems to be totally different than what we just said. The Rush says that this has nothing to do with logic, has nothing to do with empathy. The reason why we have age of 13 is because this is Halacha LaMoshe Messinai. This was the law that God gave to Moses. So this is a kind of mystery that only God knows why this age is the age. So it seems like we have over here two opposite opinions. On the one hand, you have the opinion that the age of 13 is a time when they develop emotionally, they develop their knowledge, intellectually and emotionally. But and the other opinion is no, that it's a godly mystery. But the truth of the matter is, the Rebbe explains that these two opinions are not necessarily two different opposite opinions. They're actually the two sides of one coin. And the Rebbe explains that they are, when it comes to the serving Hashem, comes to serving God, there's two ways of serving Hashem. One way is obedience and discipline. Kabbalas oil, accepting what Hashem says, whether we understand it or not. And the other way is Ta'am v'dat, doing things rationally, understanding what we do. These are two ways, and both are necessary. Let's see what the Rebbe says. So these two opinions about the starting point of our obligation to worship God represent two entry points into divine worship. According to the first opinion, worship should begin from a standpoint of reason and knowledge. The ability to serve God this way depends directly on the stage of our intellectual and emotional maturity. Thus, we become obligated to perform the mitzvahs when we mature enough to intuit the meaning of the mitzvahs and to relate to them emotionally. According to this opinion, it follows that a portal to divine worship is reason and knowledge. The second opinion is that a 13-year-old accepts the yoke of mitzvahs in obedience to a divine edict related to Moses at Sinai. 13, why 13? That's when Moshe Rabbeinu says. That's when Hashem says to Moses, 13 years old. Meaning that the whole idea of connecting to Hashem is a connection which is not based solely on understanding, but goes beyond understanding. According to this opinion, it follows that a portal to divine worship is discipline and obedience. And as we said, these are two opinions. There's two ways of serving Hashem, but you need to have both. You can't just have one. And why is that? You need to have understanding what you do. Because when you understand, then your worship is with passion. When you understand, you feel what you do, it gives you another chayus, life and passion into what you do. But at the same time, you must have also the concept of obedience and going beyond logic. Because we need that our connection and our commitment to Hashem, our commitment to God's mitzvahs should not be limited to our understanding. It's not that one day we understand this way, another day you're going to come up with a different conclusion. If another day you don't understand, it doesn't make sense anymore to you, then you're not going to do it. That's not how we connect to Hashem. It is our commitment, the Kabbalas oil, accepting the yoke of Hashem. So the next text, what we're going to read, is a text that is written by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. He was in the 1920s in Soviet Russia. And with the revolution there was such a heavy, difficult challenge to the Jewish people And the propaganda from the Soviets that it came to uproot anything that is connected with religion, with all kinds of logical explanations that this is something, a system, equality for all, and this we're going to fight every inequality and so on and so forth, communism, socialism, whatever. And this was a big, big challenge for many, many hundreds of thousands of Jews that gave up one way or another. But the previous Rebbe, he was fighting this. The Frierdiker Rebbe was using himself and the Hasidim to go with Mesiras Nefesh, literally with risking their lives and keeping the mitzvahs and Torah underground, openly, with the children, open yeshivas and mikvahs and so on. So this is a reading that you can understand this background, you can appreciate this reading, what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. Says the Rebbe, previous Rebbe, intellectual Jews today must set aside their deductions and you refuse to follow their reason and knowledge. This is because they are liable to stray. Sometimes you're in a situation when logic pulls you away from the right place. God forbid, by following the prevailing culture of our time and place and conclude that we must change our practice, with time, this can cause them to stray completely from the true path, God forbid. It might begin with a minor adjustment, but it can lead slowly and progressively to a bitter end, God forbid. We must, therefore, be fiercely determined, even to the point of self-sacrifice, not to stray even an iota, God forbid, from the code of the Jewish law. We have a Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, that is written divinely, and we follow these laws. The Torah is eternal to every era and epoch. And so we must stand firm and never feel shame before those who mock us. So yes, sometimes you need to have this conviction of, I will obey even if I don't understand. I will set my thoughts aside and do what God asks. What God asks. Nasa v'nishma, when the Jewish people, when they received the Torah, they said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Number one, we'll do, accepting to do. And how to respond to mockery, to challenges, and sometimes to our own doubts. And sometimes also to our own temptations. When you have this conviction of Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. We will go beyond logic. We do only because why? Because we are connected to Hashem. That Mesirut Nefesh, this self-sacrifice, is something that we get at the Bar Mitzvah. Where do we get this koyach? Where do we get this ability? This ability is given to each and every Jew when they turn Bar Mitzvah. Because this is the time when a special soul is entered into the child. As the Alter Rebbe says, text 10, the primary and final state of the sacred soul's entry into the body is at the age of 13 for a boy and 12 for a girl. This is why they become obligated in the Torah's commandments at that age. So this is not just about, it's not just about the conviction, the understanding. It is about the mesirus nefesh, the self-devotion, the self-sacrifice. And why is it? Because he can. Because he's able to do it. I always love to say, tell my children about mitzvah boys. And the answer they give me, that when I ask them, what happens at bar mitzvah, I become a man, I tell them, no. At bar mitzvah, you become a superman. You become a superman at the bar mitzvah. Because what happens at bar mitzvah? That's what happens. You receive that special neshama, that special power, that special soul that enables you to do things beyond logic, beyond human logic. You become a superman at the bar mitzvah. So the ability to surrender to a higher power, even when the mind is filled with doubts, cannot come from the mind itself. It must come from a point that transcends the mind. This is the nefesh elokit. This is the godly soul. So basically, two things happen at that time. We have the mind and heart begin their development, the mature development, and you have the sacred neshama, the soul that enters each and every yid. Now we can understand why we learn this story of becoming bar mitzvah from the case of Shimon and Levi that we asked. Why is it that we learn from such an event that is a violent event? Because that's the idea. What happened to Shimon and Levi? What pushed them to do this, what they did? It was the conviction that went beyond the logic. And that conviction that went beyond the logic, the mesirus nefesh, they were ready to give themselves away up, to risk their own lives, to risk their standing with their own father Yaakov, to risk everything, to do what is right. That conviction that they had, this is something that is connected with the inner neshama that they have. And as the Rebbe explains this, says the concern that the Shimon and Levi, they had a concern about the sister. Will our sister be made into a harlot? Was so distressing to Shimon and Levi that they responded like strangers, like people who are not the sons of Yaakov. They were so consumed by distress over the violation of their sister that their only choice was each man took up his sword. This is precisely why we derive the age of bar and bat mitzvah from this passage. It is a message for every bar and bat mitzvah child, which includes all Jews at the beginning stages of their spiritual progression, which in essence it applies to each and every one of us at our beginning stages or at the beginning of every day. And the lesson is that when we stray after our hearts and eyes with lustful urges and are tempted to sin, we face the risk of being made into a harlot. What does it mean? Says the Rebbe. Just as harlotry drives a wedge between a woman and her husband, so does sin form a barrier between us and God. When we are confronted by such temptation, we mustn't tolerate any rational justification or moderate response. Our only response can be stubborn resistance to sin, even to the point of self-sacrifice. Only after being inspired to self-sacrifice do we have the luxury of serving God in a fashion that follows our reasoning and the measured pace of the Torah, of the Torah's dictates. However, for our reasoned service to God to endure, our very first approach, even at the age of bar and bat mitzvah, must be stubborn determination that transcends all reason. Because this is what it means to serve Hashem. To serve Hashem is when you serve, you do what Hashem wants. You're not doing things that is understood for you. If you only do things that you understand, that make sense to you, you're serving yourself. You're not serving Hashem. This is why he says that at the beginning and the foundation has to be with this kind of determination. Determination that this is how we serve Hashem with complete devotion. You must develop a fierce loyalty to God that transcends every logical reason or explanation. A bond that is simply because it is. All explanations come later. Yes, and it should be explanations. That is why we do learn and we study to understand the reasoning behind every mitzvah. And especially when we learn it from the Chassidus, that gives depth and appreciation for mitzvahs and Torah. That gives us passion into the mitzvahs. But the foundation must be a Reuven and Shimon type foundation. A foundation that is a determination that nothing can go in a different way. It must go the way Hashem wants. So we answered, I think, the first two questions. Why the age of 13? And why do we learn this concept of bar mitzvah from such a story? The third question remains to be answered. And as you remember the third question, why is it that only Jewish people follow this? That at the age of 13 we become mature. Why isn't this something that is adapted by the other nations, as many other things were adapted from Judaism? And the answer, the Rebbe gives a very interesting answer to this. The Rebbe says basically that the type of nation that we are a unique nation. Our nationality did not begin like the other nations begin. What makes other people, other nations, a nation? You have people in one land. They live together. So now they have to unite together, to appoint a king, have an army to protect the land, and that makes them as a nation. At what age are you able to join to become part of this nation? Adulthood, age of 20, 21, whatever age you join the army. Today it's talk about age of 18 or whatever. But here, when it comes to Judaism, what started our nation? What started our nation was the Torah. The Torah made us as a people. We came out of Egypt. We didn't have a land. We didn't have what made us as nation? As us becoming God's people. And therefore, the connection to us, our maturity of connection, becoming as a nation, was the maturity of receiving the Torah and connecting to God. And that is something that, as we explained, develops at the age of 12 and 13. When we receive that physically, are we able to become more empathetic to others and understand morals, as well as the most important thing, the foundation, which is the idea of connecting and committing to Hashem because of the neshama that we have to connect them beyond logic. Let's see what the way the Rebbe says this. Says the Rebbe, Jewish children reach maturity at 13 years of age, unlike other nations, where the age of adulthood is 20, 21, etc. The reason the nations form their national identity by first setting on a common land, rather than wandering about or shepherding. Then they appoint a king, and finally establish a constitutional laws. The history of the Jewish people is the opposite. As soon as they left Egypt, while still in the desert, they began to follow the Torah and its commandments. This was their foundation and portal into nationhood. This is why Jews don't enter into adulthood when they are 20 and strong enough to defend the land. Rather, by the age of 13, when they are mature enough to begin to understand the great privilege and responsibility of being a Jew. Just to conclude with a story you heard, you might have heard this from Rabbi Shimshon Stak, Alav Shalom. He was an American boy, and he related the story when he was, he brought the family, also American boy, that with his father, a bar mitzvah boy, he brought him to the Rebbe. And the boy was a little nervous. What is the rabbi going to talk to him and this and that? But at the end of the meeting, the Rebbe turned to the boy and he asked him, are you a baseball fan? And said, yes. And he asked him, who is your team that you're rooting for? Are you a fan of the Yankees or the Dodgers? And he says, the Dodgers. So the Rebbe then asked him, does your father take you to see some professional games? And they said, yes. Once in a while, he takes him. As a matter of fact, he told him a month ago he was at the Dodgers game. So the Rebbe asked him, so how did the game go? So he said, to be honest, he was very disappointed. After a few innings, they were losing. His team was losing, 12-2 or something. And so he said, him and his family, they decided it was too much, and that's it. They left the game. So the Rebbe asked them, did the players also leave, or did they stay till the end? And he says, of course, they stayed till the end. So the Rebbe asks why. And the Rebbe says, and the boy answered to the Rebbe, he explained to them that a fan can come and go when he wants, but a player has to stay until the end. And the Rebbe told them, this is exactly what we learn from this. We have to become players. Some people are like observers. But here comes the bar mitzvah, we gotta become players. No matter what, we stay till the end. So this is the message we take from this. we got a whole new, deeper understanding of what it means, bar mitzvah. And of course, it's not just for bar mitzvah boys. It's an understanding for each and every one of us, what it means, our connection, our conviction with Hashem, the way we approach the Torah. We take the Torah and we take our connection to Hashem. The foundation is the Mesirat Nefesh. The premise is we begin with the absolute devotion to Hashem. Once we have this, yes, we need to understand, we need to study, to learn more, and to gain more and more passion and more understanding and feelings in our observing of Torah mitzvahs. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And, let me see, I just...